Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Monday, September 14th. It's also a great pleasure to be joined by Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman, who, as many of you know, is the Democratic and Progressive Party candidate for the governorship. He is running for that office for the November election, and we had a chance to talk with him recently just before the primary. And we're grateful to have another opportunity to talk today, now that the election season is firmly underway.
That's right. Voting starts in a little over a week.
That's right. You will be getting your ballots in the mail fairly shortly, I believe. Anyway, Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman, thank you for making the time to be with us today, and again, to share your views on some of the issues facing the state and what you'd be doing if you're elected as the governor. And I thought we might be able to start today by talking about something that's sort of a current event as much as anything else, and that's the Global Warming Solutions Act. As you know, the legislature, that bill finally completed its long journey through the legislature and is off to the governor's desk for a signature, or what seems the conventional wisdom seems to think that he's probably going to veto it. So I guess I just thought I'd start by asking you, what are your thoughts about the bill, and if you were governor, would you be signing it?
Well, I would sign it, and who knows, maybe the governor is setting it up that he'll let it become law without a signature, where once again he will be better than expectations, and therefore people will appreciate him, when really this bill should be signed. If we are forward thinking about the climate crisis, we've got one of the driest summers once again in Vermont. We had record temperatures in May and June around the world. We're possibly the hottest year in 10,000 years. It's been over 100 degrees in Siberia. We are at a point where hemming and hawing about the future of our climate is no longer an option. We need to be investing in a climate economy, one that both tackles the climate crisis and puts people to work. And it's just really unfortunate in my mind that the governor would be even considering vetoing this bill, because, in the political world, it's, political people always want to appease everybody and not push too hard or push too far. And so signing this legislation that says government will be held accountable if we don't take the actions necessary to address climate crisis is a pretty strong but important step. And I do hope he'll sign it.
Now, one of the concerns I've heard about the bill is that I guess it gives ordinary citizens the right to sue the state or bring legal action if certain climate goals aren't met, or emissions goals. And they sound fairly ambitious, 25% by 2026, I believe, 50% by 2035. And as you're well aware, I'm sure transportation and fossil fuels is a big part of that whole mix. Do you think it's realistic to transition to like electric vehicles or alternatives that quickly?
Well, I think there's a number of ways to reduce our emissions and or sequester carbon. For one, if we truly invested in broadband, as former governors have said they would do and then never do, including this governor, in the way that needs to happen, we would reduce auto travel by as much as 40 or 60% just by having people work from home 2 or 3 days a week. We could put investments in our agricultural sector into sequestering carbon, really aggressively moving towards regenerative agriculture with more rotational grazing, more cover crops, where we would be drawing carbon out of the air, building our soil, and not only would we be reducing carbon from the atmosphere, we'd be building organic matter in the soil, which makes the soil able to work more like a sponge to hold these heavy rains. So we'd be doing two things at once. We'd be reducing the runoff into our waterways of some of the soil-borne pollutants in our water, and we would be sequestering carbon. So to reduce our carbon emissions is something we can do with positive economic impact, because we could also invest in jobs that everyday people can do, like weatherizing homes, solarizing homes. These things have gone in the wrong direction under the Scott administration. We've lost over 500 solar jobs, 900 renewable energy jobs in the last 4 years. And we could put people back to work and work to meet those goals at the same time.
Well, you anticipated my next question, which was going to be how might the so-called green economy be leveraged to help rebuild the economy of the state
Sure.
post-pandemic?
Well, there's more. Yeah, there's definitely more. I would like to see us build more affordable housing in our town and village centers. And if you had affordable housing and we worked on childcare in our rural communities, people could live and work in place with good broadband and good paying jobs. Once you start increasing some of those numbers, you'll start to see our school numbers be better. That will help with some of the population and funding of our schools. You look at if you have people living and working in town, you'll start to see your local store making a few more sandwiches every day, a few more cups of coffee. You know, the opportunity for a local store to survive will be stronger. So there's a lot of ways that a carbon friendly economy, a climate future economy, not only makes a future better for our kids, and even now start working on our present, much less just thinking out in the future, but also puts people to work and rebuilds our villages and rebuilds our communities, which is what we really need to do. We've become a commuting culture, both in Vermont and around the country, and it's really torn apart the fabric of what a community is. You don't have as many people living in a community, it's harder to populate your volunteer fire squads. All of these things are interrelated.
Let's talk about broadband for a second there. You mentioned that a couple of times there, and of course your answer is it seems to me that the state's broadband strategy for build out seems to rely a lot on communications union districts that have sprouted up in a few places. There's one down here in the Bennington County area, the Southern Vermont Communications Union District,
Yeah,
and
it's great.
a couple over in neighboring Windham County. But I'm wondering if that approach, as I understand it anyway, seems to anticipate a 3 or 4 year time frame. And as we've seen in the last couple of months, the need for more robust broadband service to underserved parts of the state has grown exponentially for a lot of reasons, education and remote workers and telemedicine, a whole lot of reasons. Do you think, and if I'm correct in my assumption about the CUDs being sort of the way we're going to do this, is that good enough, or should the state be making more of an investment?
Well, we should have been starting years ago, and with any kind of leadership, we would have. But the legislature put this together, which is a really good piece of legislation to finally get the ball rolling. There are federal dollars out there. There are match dollars that once these CUDs form and can bond for some of the base funding, they can leverage federal money and really build this stuff out. I would say that the state needs to put money into it as well to help leverage more of that federal money to have it build out faster. There are issues even right now with some of the COVID money that was supposed to be helping people hook up. There might be cables, fiber optic going by people's property on the road, but if it was going to be a $2,000 or $3,000 hookup to get it to their house, they couldn't do it, and the Comcast and the private for-profit companies certainly wouldn't put out that kind of money. We need to make sure we're getting that money out the door and getting those folks hooked up. We also need to make sure that those folks who are subsidized with their hookups, that the Comcasts of the world who then didn't pay for that, make sure they maintain stable and customer-friendly rates. Because again, let's think about broadband as what electricity was and what telephone lines were when they were not built to the final mile back many, many years ago. It took government stepping in because the capitalist model doesn't pay. It doesn't pay to get that last mile strung. And that's true whether it was phones, whether it's electricity, whether it's paved roads or quality roads. And that's where the collective resources of our society come together to build that infrastructure to help the overall economy, which in turn helps all of us. This debate has been lost in the rhetoric of politics that, capitalism, socialism, communism, we are none of those things. We are closest to capitalism, but we need to utilize some collective resources to build the opportunity for people to have business or have healthcare through broadband, or in this case, as you were just talking about, education with remote learning. We have got to build out at least main trunk lines with hub spots that people could go to, not one in town with 400 cars in a parking lot, but get it spread throughout the state as quickly as possible.
Um, let's pivot to another area that's kind of been in the news a bit lately, and that's the whole question around the state colleges. The legislature, my understanding anyway, if it's correct, included about 20 to 25 million dollars in bridge funding to help them get through their immediate problem. But I guess that then begs the question of what happens next after that. If you're elected governor, what would be your approach to helping, or what should the government do to help the state colleges?
Well, there's a few things there. First, what happens next is we keep our state colleges open. We figure out a way, because the economic impact of those institutions in the rural parts of our state where they are is huge. The hope and aspiration for our high school kids to have an opportunity at education is dashed if we say we can't afford our state colleges, which is essentially what the governor said this spring. And again, for the last 4 years, didn't put together the plan, did not put together the task force that now is together. So this bridge funding is to get us to next year so that this panel and this task force work, plus the ad hoc groups, because there are all kinds of people working on this, because professors and teachers, students, business people, people of every aspect of the society throughout where those 3 campuses in that whole region are pulling together to save those state colleges. We have opportunities to focus some of the studies even more. We've got great teacher programs, great meteorological programs. We have a huge need for elder care service providers. We have a need for child care business owners and providers. We have these needs that we could focus these institutions towards in partnership with local businesses to make them more economically viable. And we have to make the hard decisions. Are we as a state ready and interested in all paying in order to have state colleges for Vermonters? That's a question society has to face. Most politicians don't want to go near the idea of people paying in order for us all to do better, but that's the conversation we need to have. And I think most Vermonters, when you look at what happened back in the spring when Chancellor Spalding's proposal came forward, I saw the fastest, most organic grassroots movement form of any issue I've worked on in 25 years in Vermont. Nearly 30,000 people signed petition signatures within about a week that said, keep our state colleges open. They were not left-wingers, right-wingers, urban or rural, solo. They were all over the state. So clearly, the Vermonter in all of us wants those state colleges open, and that has to be a priority with the ideas from the task force, the ideas from the citizen groups, and we have to make sure the funding is there. It's just not a question in my mind.
The unfunded pension liabilities the state is facing, it's kind of similar, I guess it sounds like anyway, to the state college situation where, the red flags have been up for a while, but it was easier to kick the can down the road, as the saying goes. We're now looking at, what, a $4 to $5 billion problem there with
a big problem.
Liabilities, which sounds like an awful lot of money. How quickly do we need to kind of start making some progress on reducing that number?
Yeah, well, the treasurer did a really amazing job a few years ago. She worked with the teachers and the state union to figure out how we can set up an actuarial chart that's going to get us out from under this hole. We didn't build the hole overnight. We're not going to get out from it overnight. But the state funds and payments in have gone up significantly. Last year, I think it was up close to $160 million went into that fund. And right now, there's going to be bigger drawdown than there is resources going in. However, the increase that was made and the chart of where that's supposed to go for these next 20 years is to get us back to a balanced fund with payments going in equaling payments going out. And there's no doubt it's going to be a burden on all of us for the next 20 years, because that's money that's got to go in the fund that otherwise would be able to be spent on other aspects of our society, whether it was broadband or otherwise. And this is a problem that got going way back. I mean, under Howard Dean, Jim Douglas, Peter Shumlin. This is not solely Phil Scott's responsibility, nor the legislature's, but it's something where they set the expected rate of return just a quarter point or a half point too high over and over and over again, and the returns just regularly did not come in. But these are the tricks that clever governors use to make it look like the budget is fine. We can put a little less money in because it's going to return a better yield, and that way I can fund the things that look good in the news stories. And that's one of the real challenges of the 2-year cycle. That's one of the real challenges with people not looking a little deeper at the issues than the soundbite politics. And we can't afford that anymore. We can't afford it nationally. We can't afford it locally. We need someone who's going to dig in, look deeper, not just say, well, let's cut government by 2% across the board, as the current governor just said. Let's instead go, where can we make government work more effectively to create better opportunities for success for Vermonters? And that means rolling up your sleeves, talking with the frontline employees, looking at the silos in state government and saying, we got to break down these 20 and 30 and 40-year-old systems and say, what have we learned or what have people learned across the country in how to deliver human services better? How can we break down the silos between different programs and human services and make sure when we help someone, we're looking at all aspects of the concerns and difficulties they're facing and get them back on their feet, not on a couple of toes by one service, but then fall off with another one. We've got to integrate our services and have better outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you say, that was a problem long in the building and covers many administrations. You mentioned affordable housing earlier, and that's been a subject that's popped up down here a lot in the last year or so. So I've often wondered, why is it that it's so hard to incentivize developers to build affordable housing when the market is screaming for workforce affordable housing, that it's so hard to get it done?
Well, because for private developers, you make more profit on a higher end home than you do on a low income or an affordable home. And so the private sector model is go where the most money is. And that's fine, but that's why we have government. That's why we have nonprofits, because the incentive under, normal systems is if you can build a house and make 50,000 profit, you can build a house and make 10,000 profit. And I don't know what the numbers really are, but you're going to build a house to make a $50,000 profit. And, the difference between Levittown and here is we don't have a lot of wide open flat land where you can just, build it all out and not have ramifications for water quality or wide open spaces. And so we do have permitting in Vermont that does make it a little more difficult. And the question is, do people want to throw that out and create Levittown? Or do we look at some ideas where we could create denser housing in our village centers? We obviously need to deal with, sewage and runoff, but it's far less impactful to build a 3 or 4 unit building that goes up than 3 or 4 units that go out as far as impervious surface. And so I think we need to invest more in affordable housing, call it workforce housing, call it whatever, opportunity housing, word that works for people, but that takes state support. And right now, with COVID, we are seeing huge pressure on our housing. And one of the reasons we're also expensive is we are in the New England market. Someone can sell a couple thousand square foot home in the Boston area for $800,000, $900,000, or New York or parts of Connecticut, and they can buy a 2,000 foot home with, a bunch of acres here for 400 or 500, and they feel like that's not that much. Of course, to a Vermonter, that's huge. So for all the people that are gung-ho for pure capitalism, that's what it is. If you want unaffordable housing, that's pure capitalism. But what we really need to be doing is looking at how do we make sure we have some of all of those things. Housing for those that can afford the higher end housing, and housing for those that are just getting going. And it's really important to look at, because we're looking at the costs and the governor's favorite word of affordability. When you look, Public Assets Institute in Montpelier did a lot of research, and the cost of living in Vermont is very similar to much of northern New England, northern New York. It's not that different. Winter, travel, all those things to get to work. But our incomes are 18% below the regional average. So the reason affordability is so challenging for people is our wages are too low. And of course, one of the differences between me and Governor Scott is he vetoed the minimum wage twice. And that first veto, had it gone into effect, working class minimum wage vote people today would be making $1,000 more this year. So they're now called essential workers. We say they should have more money. They would have had more money if he hadn't vetoed the minimum wage 3 years ago.
An interesting follow-up to this, and I think I'm sure we talked about this a month or two ago before the primary when we had our conversation then, is Act 250. I see it's also one of the items the legislature is considering, but in a drastically scaled back version that kind of is not dealing directly with the downtown and village development you were mentioning a moment ago. I guess if you're elected governor, would you be pushing for the full vote on Act 250, or how should it be revised?
Well, I think there were good concerns brought up by those who are advocating for cleaner water and so forth. And, we shouldn't be weakening Act 250. At the same time, we need to look at when Act 250 was in place, there didn't exist some of the local zoning and, development controls at the local level. So I don't think it's exactly weakening Act 250 or weakening the protection of our village centers by saying, as long as you've got local zoning and permitting that meets the criteria, why make people do it twice? At the same time, we do have to address our water quality issues, which is why carbon sequestration and regenerative agriculture is a big part of my platform. Why we need to build up, not out, so that we have denser housing with less impervious surface, because again, soil that can absorb water is much better than pavement or roofs that slough it off into the rivers right away. And we need to be looking at how are we handling human waste and sewers, and there's still a huge issue of combined sewer overflows, but I think we can't conflate the problems of the past, which is building all of those combined sewer and rain runoff systems in our urban areas with small village development where you can still build appropriate scale systems to address some of those concerns.
You mentioned the minimum wage bill a moment ago, and one of the legislative items that's sort of been conjoined with that is the paid family leave bill, which again kind of didn't go anywhere just the past year and the year before that, I think.
The governor vetoed it. Let's not be euphemistic. It got vetoed.
So I'm assuming that if you're elected, you would not veto that legislation, were the legislature to pick it up again and bring it through.
No, I mean, look at this spring, how much trouble people had with the unemployment system. That was a fiasco. That was avoidable. Part of avoiding it would have been had we had a paid family leave bill in effect. If that had been the case, there's a number of families that would have been able to go through that channel and not clogged up the UI system. And you would have had less of a logjam, more people getting the resources and services they needed to keep food on the table. The calls I got at the Lieutenant Governor's office, and I know representatives and senators got these kinds of calls, when people were on hold for weeks on end, busy signals, never getting callbacks, people were furious, and rightly so. They couldn't get a call back from the governor's office. They couldn't get through to the UI system. Many of those things would have been at least alleviated a little bit had we had a paid family leave program in place. Besides that, there were other governors that created cloud systems to process these applications faster. And the governor, even after having been warned by Speaker Johnson and President Pro Tem Tim Ash in February, look, if this gets bad and you have to shut things down, the UI system is going to be overwhelmed. You better be planning for it. The governor didn't do that planning. And that's one of the big differences between he and I. I'm thinking about both taking care of the present and planning for the future so that we are more resilient, more able to handle challenging circumstances, whether it be the climate, the economy, or in this case, something that was unprecedented. So I don't blame him for the scale of this challenge, but there was very little planning in place to make us resilient. And that's the difference between the Scott and the Zuckerman administration.
Well, we just have a couple of minutes left, and I guess I would feel remiss if I didn't ask you some question that dealt with the pandemic and the COVID emergency. And I was thinking, what are you seeing as the sort of lessons, for lack of a better word, that are coming out of this whole experience. Is there anything that's happened in the last 6 months that's made you think, wow, we've really, well, we talked about several of the issues just now, but that made you think, we need to build more resilience here, or we need to do something better there?
Sure.
Anything that really comes to top of mind around that?
Well, a couple things. Universal healthcare comes to mind. We've all of a sudden created universal COVID care because it was something that could affect everybody. And sometimes folks said, well, I don't want universal healthcare. That's someone else's problem. If they get sick, that's their problem. Well, now we're truly seeing how interconnected we are. When someone gets sick, it could affect us all. And if we had a more robust universal system in place, some of the setup of that would have been far easier. Some of the overhead costs would have not existed because we already would have had the records in place and the systems in place. So I very much support a universal system. Maybe we start with the universal primary care system, but that's a big lesson. The unemployment system has an just 30-year-old computer system. The programmers don't even know how to use it anymore. When you're in government, your job, as the governor has said over and over, is to prepare for the worst, hope for the best. Well, the preparation just wasn't done. And I think that's something we're learning from this is you can only kick the can down the road as a governor and as leadership of the state so long before you put people's lives in jeopardy. And I think that's one of the challenges in politics again, is everyone's got to say, look, I balanced the budget, but if you balance it by cutting off the future and the resiliency for the future, that's really not a balanced budget. So we need to be having those conversations. We had really amazing citizenry in Vermont. People stepped up. The mutual aid groups were amazing. The work to protect each other by wearing masks and by stepping back when we were having conversations and staying outside or even isolating ourselves. Vermont, we were very lucky to have a very community-minded population, where some other states really threw caution to the wind. And I think Vermonters deserve a lot of credit. The governor deserves some credit. Dr. Levine is right up there. I just want to let people know that I would certainly offer and ask Dr. Levine to stay on were I to become governor, because I think the steadiness at the wheel is really Dr. Levine and his research and advice for the governor. And if we follow that advice, we will do well. So I would keep Dr. Levine in his position. And I think we have to throw our hat as a thank you to Senator Leahy. People might not realize, but his work on the small state minimum for a lot of federal programs also applied to the COVID resources. As people think about how dire Vermont's economy is and budget and the lack of resources for recovery are, just imagine, Vermont, if we had $500 million less. That is what Senator Leahy secured for us many years ago and continues to fight for with the small state minimum. So truly, if I were to give maximum credit, it would be Senator Leahy, Dr. Levine, and truly the people of Vermont.
Well, all right. We'll have to leave it there for now, Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman, but I want to thank you again for making the time out of I'm sure, a very busy schedule to share your views with us today. And, well, maybe we'll talk again.
Happy to. Thank you for the opportunity. And I would just say, folks, reach out if you have any questions, Zuckerman, FORVT.com. Folks know I've always opened my office wide open. I'll talk and listen to anybody. So if you've got issues, concerns, needs, frustrations, feel free to reach out to either my office as Lieutenant Governor to see if we can help with your needs at the moment, but also if you've got thoughts about the campaign, Zuckerman, FORVT.com. Thank you.
All right. Thanks again, Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman. Really appreciate your time.
You bet.
All right.